Thank you. Please. Now we get to the fun part, where you guys get to challenge me. And there is a mic to go around, but if the first people are brave enough to speak loudly, I'd even prefer that because it's a little less intimidating. And we have a question right there. Go ahead, man. No, I think people understood to a large extent that Canada in the early 90s was facing massive amounts of debts and deficit. We were about to be downgraded in our credit rating, which would have severely impinged upon our ability to function as a country, and we were going to have to start paying even more in deficits. We were looking to New Zealand's example as a country that pretty much went bankrupt in the late 80s and had to make ridiculously difficult decisions. And in the mid-90s, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and Finance Minister Paul Martin made some very, very difficult decisions. And yes, they had to rein back spending significantly. But they balanced the books. And as soon as the books were balanced, they got back to spending once again. And they restored massive amounts of the spending that they'd had to cut. And they sat down to negotiate the 2004 health accords and sent more money to the provinces with less strings attached, proportionately or in absolute terms, than ever had been before. Yes, we had to go through a few tough years where the Liberals had to make tough decisions around what to cut. But we came out of that leaner and much stronger. Now the question is, as we're approaching the 2014 health accords, which in 2004 were involved in 4 years of negotiations with the premiers and federal provincial conversations about what is needed and how to do it, there will be no federal provincial conversations about the 2014 health accords. Mr. Harper has declared how much money he's sending, and that's it. There's no room for discussion, no room for sharing, no room for negotiations. And these are the kinds of decisions and decision-making process that we're going through right now. Yes, we faced a worldwide recession. It started in 2008. Now, you may remember that Jim Flaherty put out, as finance minister, a projection that saw us staying on the surplus side. We were not going into deficit. And of course, he did that just before the election, and after the election, he revised his numbers. What happened was they inherited a $13 billion surplus in 2006, and it was gone by 2008. That $13 billion was money, rainy day money, contingency fund money, money that we'd have to rely on if things turned sour. And turn sour they did. And instead of having a $13 billion surplus, we're looking at a $50 billion deficit. So the Conservatives are having to make choices. Choices about what to cut. Choices about what not to cut. And when you have the man who's holding the purse strings, the one who's responsible for a $50 million gazebo in his own riding, when you have the defense minister of a very militarily enthused government making a $10 billion mistake, I mean, I'm hoping it was a mistake, because the alternative is they deliberately chose to conceal that both from Parliament and from the Canadian people, and I will still ascribe to them being honorable but kind of incompetent with numbers instead of being, flat out evil. These guys, I don't know where it comes from. The Conservatives still have a reputation as being sound economic managers. You know, and we're beginning to see in the kinds of choices they make. Listen, there's nothing inherently wrong with going into deficit. What depends is what you use the money you go into deficit to invest in. If you borrow $1,000 from a bank and you invest it in a flat screen TV, okay, that's one thing. If you borrow $1,000 from a bank and invest it instead in your friend's startup lemonade stand, and they turn around and you're able to not just pay back the bank a year later or 5 years later, but buy equity shares in Google with it, then you're doing great. So borrowing money in terms of leveraging it, that's how our capitalist system works. It's all good. The important part is what you choose to cut in terms of services and where you choose to spend with the money you borrow. And the fact is, this government hasn't been very smart about those choices. Did the Liberal government in the 90s make some mistakes? Sure, absolutely. Every government makes mistakes. Were we better off once we'd gotten through the 90s with a Liberal government? Absolutely. Tory times are tough times. That's what people need to remember. Thank you very much. Question in the back. Nope, the hand's down. It was a stretch. Anyone else? Yes, sir. I think there's a really important question around tone there. Are we going to sit back and let Stephen Harper, swing away like he had before and conceal the truth, manage the truth, and yes, flat out lie the way he has? And that's a hard word, and it's a word we're not supposed to use in Parliament. And it's a word we stay away from. The reason you're not supposed to use it is because the penalties for actually lying are so huge in Parliament, used to be, that it was unthinkable that someone would simply toss that around lightly. But now you get things, and this actually happened. The Prime Minister stood up in his place after the coalition crisis, and this is sort of a neutral and easy little example to give you. He stood up and he announced that, how could the official opposition make a deal with the separatists and the socialists when it was even demanded that when they sign that document, there be no Canadian flags in the room. And they signed that with no Canadian flags in the room. That was supposed to make us go, wow, look how we're kowtowing to the dangerous separatists in Quebec. Of course, within 5 minutes, people had pulled up a picture of Messrs. Dion, Layton, and Duceppe signing with a bank of Canada's flags behind them. And the Prime Minister was never properly called on it. Again. And he probably said, I was mistaken. I was given some mistaken information. But there was no big deal about it. These guys lie. And the concern around that is we need to respond. But let me tell you a few things about attack ads. When Mr. Harper attacked Mr. Ignatieff, it wasn't about getting people to vote for Mr. Harper. It was getting people who might have said, I had a lot of respect for Mr. Ignatieff as an intellectual. He seems like a very smart and decent man. Oh, but no, he's just visiting. And oh, but no, he didn't come back for us. And oh, well, maybe I won't bother going out to vote anyway, at all. It's about suppressing the vote. It's about encouraging people to be more cynical about politics. And it's about knowing that if you can mobilize your rabid base for money, for political actions, and diminish the number of good, hard-working, honest folk from actually feeling like they can do anything in politics and connect and make any difference in politics and instead stay home, well, those people who live on the extremes get better things to get more weight to each of their votes. And the challenge that we have as Liberals is we don't have those extreme bases. We don't sit on any of the poles, the polar opposites of politics. we believe in trying to find the best solution regardless of whether it's a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. We try to govern, from the right a little bit around fiscal issues, but build social programs around the left, because that balance is the balance that Canada gets. When Stephen Harper starts to swing at us and lie, will we fight back? Did I hit that senator hard enough for you?